Pittsburgh has 446 bridges, more than Venice, more than any city on Earth. On January 28, 2022, at 6:37 in the morning, one of them fell. Fern Hollow Bridge, a concrete span over a ravine in Frick Park, dropped 150 feet to the creek below. 2 Port Authority buses were on it. 10 people were injured. Nobody died. Federal investigators would later describe it as predictable. Fern Hollow had been rated poor in federal inspections in 2011, then in 2014, then in 2017, then in 2019. Pennsylvania, as of 2021, carried a backlog of 3,500 structurally deficient bridges, the 3rd worst rate in the country. That same afternoon, President Biden flew into Pittsburgh to announce the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, a $1.2 trillion bill designed to fix exactly this. Pittsburgh doesn't have a bridge problem. It has a maintenance accountability vacuum. The bridges keep multiplying. The money to save them keeps disappearing. To understand why that bridge fell, you have to understand what Pittsburgh actually is. The city sits at the confluence of 3 rivers, the Allegheny, the Monongahela, and the Ohio. It covers more than 90 square miles, and it does not just cross rivers. It crosses ravines, hollows, creek beds carved thousands of years ago by glacial meltwater, grinding through southwestern Pennsylvania. The terrain does not ask whether you need a bridge. It tells you that you do. That's how a city of 300,000 people ends up with 446 bridges. The count is not civic pride, it is geology, but the number alone does not explain the danger. For that, you need to know who owns them. Pittsburgh proper is responsible for roughly 100 of those bridges. The Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, PennDOT, holds another block. Allegheny County maintains its own inventory. Private entities claim some as well. The ownership map is fragmented, and that fracturing has consequences. The National Bridge Inspection Standards, the federal program governing bridge safety, require that every public bridge in the country be inspected at least once every 2 years. Pennsylvania was inspecting. Every cycle, the reports came in, and every cycle, the pile of structurally deficient bridges kept growing. By 2021, the American Society of Civil Engineers Infrastructure Report Card ranked Pennsylvania 3rd worst nationally for structurally deficient bridges. On the morning of January 28, 2022, a Pittsburgh resident named Cheryl Hall boarded Port Authority Route 51 for her daily commute. It was just before 6:30 in the morning, still dark. The bus moved through Squirrel Hill and started across Fern Hollow Bridge. Then the deck gave way. The span failed suddenly, dropping the front of the bus 150 feet into the ravine below. A second bus was caught at the collapsed edge. 10 people were taken to local hospitals. By the grace of timing, 6:37 a.m., before the morning rush had fully built, no one was killed. In the days that followed, Pittsburgh Mayor Ed Gainey confirmed what was no longer surprising, but was still infuriating. The city had known about Fern Hollow's condition for years. It appeared on capital improvement planning documents. It was acknowledged as needing repair. It was simply never funded. What made it worse was what other riders reported. In the months before the collapse, passengers on Route 51 had described the bridge as bouncy, a vibration they felt under the bus each time it crossed. Those observations were informal. They were never systematically escalated. They fell into the gap between public concern and institutional response, and they stayed there. Then, hours after the collapse, President Biden landed in Pittsburgh. He was there to announce the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, $1.2 trillion in federal spending, with $110 billion earmarked specifically for roads and bridges. He stood less than 5 miles from a bridge that had just fallen and spoke about fixing exactly this kind of failure. The optics were almost too precise to be real, but optics are not the point. The point is that Fern Hollow did not collapse because no one knew about the infrastructure problem. It collapsed because knowing about a problem and having a functioning system to address it are two entirely different things. Pittsburgh had the first. It did not have the second. So here is the question the timing raises. Where did the money go? The answer requires going back to 2007. That year, the Pennsylvania General Assembly passed Act 44, the Transportation Funding Reform Act. The legislation was designed to modernize how the state paid for surface transportation infrastructure. The central mechanism was the Pennsylvania Turnpike. Toll revenues would flow into transportation budgets. Infrastructure would get funded. What actually happened was structurally inverted. Under Act 44, the Turnpike Commission was required to transfer $450 million per year to PennDOT. But this was not funded through toll revenue growth. The commission was required to issue bonds, to borrow money, and use that debt to make the annual transfers. The result was a financial trap. The Turnpike spent 15 years accumulating bond debt to pay PennDOT a sum that PennDOT was supposed to apply to infrastructure, while the commission's total debt load climbed past $15 billion. And critically, even the money that reached PennDOT was largely absorbed into transit operating subsidies, necessary spending, but not bridge capital repair. The maintenance backlog was not the destination. From 2007 to 2022, Act 44 redirected an estimated $6 billion or more away from the state's infrastructure capital program. PennDOT's backlog of structurally deficient bridges grew from roughly 3,000 spans in 2007 to more than 4,000 by 2016. The deficient bridges were multiplying while the budget to address them was being legally redirected elsewhere. That is the first real twist in this story. The funding gap was not carelessness or ignorance. It was a legislatively mandated financial mechanism that drained the exact budget pool meant to prevent this. And Act 44 only explains the state level. For city-owned bridges like Fern Hollow, the problem compounded at every level below. Pittsburgh's general fund was consumed for years by legacy pension obligations. Through much of the 2010s, pension liabilities accounted for between 20 and 25% of the city's general fund spending, a legally required commitment that could not be deferred the way a bridge repair could. Federal funding offered a theoretical third route, but the FHWA Highway Bridge Program distributed dollars through formulas weighting traffic, volume, and structural scale. A small hollow bridge in a residential park neighborhood scored low by design. It was not built into the formula to save Fern Hollow. Every layer of potential rescue had a structural reason not to act. The culpability chain ran without a single point of failure. It ran as designed. What makes this genuinely difficult to absorb is that none of it was hidden. The paper trail on Fern Hollow alone stretches more than a decade. Federal inspection reports rated the bridge poor in 2011, 2014, 2017, and 2019. Each cycle, the rating persisted. Each cycle, nothing moved. The documentation was accurate and complete. The action column remained empty. Pittsburgh's own 2015 capital improvement plan listed Fern Hollow as a priority repair. The city named the problem in its own budget documents and then did not fund it. That is not an oversight. That is a decision made repeatedly over years. The Pennsylvania chapter of the American Society of Civil Engineers published statewide infrastructure warnings in 2014, 2017, and 2019. The 2019 report stated explicitly that Pennsylvania's bridge maintenance was under-resourced. Its backlog was growing, and deferred repairs were compounding into greater future costs. The professional engineering community was not quiet. It wrote the reports, it published them, it held the press conferences. Inside PennDOT, the concern was documented at the agency level. In 2022, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette obtained a 2019 internal memo in which PennDOT staff acknowledged elevated deferred maintenance risk, specifically for hollow bridges in the Pittsburgh metropolitan area. The department identified the category as vulnerable. Fern Hollow was in that category. Meanwhile, the Pennsylvania General Assembly had multiple opportunities to dismantle Act 44. Between 2012 and 2018, reform legislation was introduced to restructure the Turnpike Commission's transfer obligations. Those efforts were opposed by the Commission, which had financial incentives to preserve the existing arrangement. Reform was debated. Reform did not pass. Congress provided another theoretical opening with the FAST Act of 2015, a $305 billion surface transportation authorization that increased Pennsylvania's federal transportation allocation. But the FHWA formula governing bridge-specific repair dollars still prioritized large structures on high-traffic corridors. Pittsburgh's hollow bridges scored the same under the new money as they had before it arrived. Here's the thing about structurally deficient. The federal classification does not require a bridge to close. It does not trigger a mandatory repair timeline. It documents a condition, files the observation, and moves to the next inspection cycle. A bridge can carry full traffic loads with a poor rating for 11 years, and the classification system does not prevent that. It only records it. After the collapse, things moved with a speed that the preceding decade had made look impossible. Within weeks, Pittsburgh city officials had committed to rebuilding Fern Hollow Bridge. A contractor was selected. Federal emergency relief funding was unlocked. The city coordinated with PennDOT and Allegheny County in ways that 11 years of drift had never demanded. By November 2022, 9 months after the deck fell into the ravine, a new bridge opened. Officials called it a model of rapid reconstruction. Structurally, it was. The timing aligned with genuine legislative correction. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act channeled $1.6 billion to Pennsylvania, specifically for bridge repair over 5 years. Pennsylvania also moved to repeal its Act 44 transfer obligations in 2022, ending the Turnpike Commission's forced bond-funded payments to PennDOT and restoring some capital flow to the state's infrastructure budget. The law that had drained the maintenance pool for 15 years was finally unwound. For a moment, the story appeared to resolve. The collapsed bridge was rebuilt. The draining legislation was repealed. The federal money arrived. The system seemed to have corrected itself in response to a catastrophe. Here is where the second twist lands. In 2023, a routine audit by the Allegheny County Controller's Office found 23 county-owned bridges carrying poor structural ratings with no funded repair timeline in the current capital plan. 23 bridges, the same rating Fern Hollow carried for 11 years before the deck gave way. Pittsburgh still owns roughly 100 bridges with no dedicated maintenance fund. The city's capital improvement plan through 2027 identifies 14 of those spans for repair. 100 bridges, 14 addressed. The IIJA formula, the new federal money, still weights large spans and high-traffic corridors. Pittsburgh's hollow ravine bridges score the same under the updated formula as they did under the old one. Their position in the queue has not meaningfully changed. One bridge was rebuilt fast and well. That became the national story. Meanwhile, 22 other bridges in Allegheny County are sitting in the same queue that Fern Hollow occupied for more than a decade. The headline was solved. The system was not. So go back to the number. 446 bridges, more than Venice. The comparison gets used as civic trivia, a piece of Pittsburgh identity. But the count was never an achievement. It was a liability that nobody formally claimed. Each of those bridges represents a commitment the city made to terrain, to industrial-era growth, to the logic of a steel economy that needed workers and supply lines crossing ravines at speed. The steel economy is gone, the bridges remain, and the financial architecture to maintain them was never built to match what the terrain demanded. What collapsed on January 28, 2022, was not just a concrete span. It was the visible endpoint of 15 years of legally mandated budget diversion, formula-driven federal neglect, fractured municipal ownership, and a classification language so carefully hedged that officials could document danger for over a decade without being required to stop it. Terrain created the bridges. The steel boom built them fast and loose. Industrial decline starved the city. Pension obligations consumed the capital budget. Act 44 drained the state. The FHWA formula ignored the small ones. The inspections documented what they found and filed the reports. Every layer of the system saw the problem. No layer of the system owned the fix. Pittsburgh has more bridges than Venice. Venice floods. Pittsburgh's bridges just quietly wait their turn.